a decorated officer sworn to uphold the law, a military veteran who served his country with pride, a family that should have been bound by love, not by blood-stained betrayal. But behind closed doors, a twisted secret festered, one that would turn a daughter into a murderer, a father into a willing accomplice, and an entire household into nothing more than a crime scene. It was a relationship that defied morality, a plan driven by pure greed, and a crime so cold-blooded that even the most seasoned detectives were left in shock. Because when the truth came out, it wasn't just about murder, it was about something far more disturbing: incest, deception, and the ruthless pursuit of money. This is the shocking case of a Texas police officer who didn't just break the law. She shattered every human boundary. She married her own father, deceived everyone around her, and then wiped out her entire family in a staged home invasion, all for one reason: VA benefits. She thought she had planned the perfect crime, eliminating everyone who stood in her way. But as investigators peeled back the layers of her lies, they uncovered a web of deceit so horrifying that it sent chills through the justice system. In the end, it wasn't just the brutality of the murders that horrified the world, it was the reason behind them. Before we dive into this mind-blowing case, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Everyday True Crime, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the darkest crimes. And when you hear the full story, we want to know what you think. Was this the ultimate act of greed, or was there something even more sinister driving her? Let's get into it. From the outside, the Davenport family looked like any other middle-class household in Texas. But inside those walls, there was nothing but dysfunction, resentment, and a storm quietly brewing in the heart of one child, Soraya Davenport, 26. From the moment she could walk, Soraya was a force of rebellion, defiant, reckless, unapologetically wild. While most kids were learning boundaries, she was breaking them. She didn't just challenge authority, she laughed in its face. Teachers dreaded having her in class. Neighbors whispered about the screaming matches that echoed from the Davenport home, and her own family could never quite figure out what to do with her. Her mother, Lena Davenport, 55, had long since given up on trying to fix her. She was a strict woman, cold, sharp-tongued, and unyielding. She had grown up in hardship and believed in discipline, but with Soraya, every rule felt like a battle she could never win. The more she tried to control her, the harder Soraya pushed back. Her father, Jameson Davenport, 63, was different. A retired Army veteran, Jameson had always been the quiet type, stern but not overbearing, distant but not completely absent. His way of handling Soraya was simple: avoid the problem, let Lena deal with it. But there was always an unspoken tension between them, something that neither of them could quite put into words. And then there were Soraya's younger siblings, Camille, 20, and Braylon, 16. The golden children. Camille was everything Soraya wasn't: obedient, intelligent, and effortlessly likable. She was their mother's pride, the daughter who never got into trouble, the one who made perfect grades and dreamed of being a doctor. Braylon was the baby of the family, playful, sweet, and completely shielded from the chaos his older sister stirred up. Soraya resented them, despised them even. In her eyes, Camille and Braylon were the family's perfect little dolls, while she was the child no one wanted. She saw the way Lena's eyes softened when Camille spoke, the way Braylon was showered with affection, the way she was treated like an outsider in her own home. By the time she was 17, she'd had enough. One night, after another explosive fight with Lena, one where words were thrown like knives, cutting deep in ways that would never heal, Soraya made her decision. She packed a bag and left. No tears, no goodbyes, no looking back. She drifted from place to place, crashing on friends' couches, hustling to survive, doing whatever it took to get by. But despite everything, she kept one thread of connection to her past: Jameson. While she barely spoke to Lena, Camille, or Braylon, Jameson was different. He was the only one who ever reached out, the only one who didn't judge her for leaving. At first, it was simple, occasional check-ins, short conversations, nothing too deep. But over time, something shifted. The line between father and daughter blurred, twisted by distance, secrecy, and an unsettling sense of understanding. Soraya had spent her whole life feeling unwanted. Jameson had spent his life feeling unseen. And together they became something they were never meant to be. Soraya and Jameson's connection should have faded with time. The years apart should have healed whatever wounds remained, making them strangers to each other. But instead, the distance only pulled them closer. It started with small things. A check-in call here, a text there. At first it was normal, casual conversations about life, work, survival. Soraya had learned to fend for herself since leaving home at 17, and she wore her independence like armor. But deep down she craved something more. She had spent years resenting her mother, feeling abandoned by her family, searching for a place where she belonged. And somehow Jameson was the only one who ever made her feel seen. He didn't scold her, he didn't judge her, he listened. Their phone calls became longer, stretching late into the night. They talked about everything, his regrets, her anger, the past, the future. She told him things she never told anyone else. How she hated the way Lena looked at her like a lost cause. How she could never forgive Camille for being the daughter her mother actually wanted. How she despised the fact that Braylon, too young to understand, would grow up thinking their mother was some kind of saint. Jameson understood. He too felt like an outsider in his own home. Lena had always been the one in control, the one who set the rules, the one who dictated how their family should function. And he had spent years quietly falling into the background, letting her lead, letting her push him aside. But with Soraya, he wasn't invisible. With Soraya, he mattered. The first time she visited him, it had been years since she last stepped foot near her family. She was 22 then, living on her own, navigating adulthood with the same recklessness that had defined her teenage years. She had worked odd jobs, hustled to survive, and eventually she found her way into law enforcement, not out of a desire to protect and serve, but because it was stable, consistent. She had no passion for it, but being a cop gave her something she had never had before: control. For the first time in her life, she had authority. She had a badge, a gun, a uniform that commanded respect. And most importantly, she had power. The ability to dictate what was right, what was wrong, and who paid the price for crossing the line. Maybe in some twisted way, it was her way of rewriting the past. Maybe after years of being cast as the problem child, she wanted to be the one holding the rules. Jameson was proud of her. When she told him about her job, he didn't question her motives. He didn't see the irony in a girl like her becoming the law. He just listened, nodding in approval, telling her he always knew she was strong. And for Soraya, that was enough. That night when she hugged him goodbye, it lingered. It was longer than it should have been, tighter, different. Neither of them acknowledged it. But something had shifted. After that, the visits became more frequent. Every time she came over, the conversations drifted further into dangerous territory. The space between them got smaller. Their words became softer. Their touches lasted just a second too long. And then, one night, the line was crossed. She had been drinking. Just a little. They were sitting close. Too close. She laughed at something he said, and when she looked at him, really looked at him, something in his eyes made her chest tighten. It wasn't the look of a father watching over his daughter. It was something darker, something neither of them should have felt. She didn't move away. Neither did he. When he touched her face, she let him. When he leaned in, she didn't stop him. And when their lips met, it was as if the world had already decided this was inevitable. Wrong, twisted, unforgivable, but inevitable. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. because after that night, there was no turning back. The guilt came in waves, not because of what they had done, but because of how easy it was. Jameson didn't regret it, not even a little. If anything, he embraced it, as if this was always meant to happen, as if this was something he had been waiting for all along. He stopped pretending to be the father she once knew. Now he was hers. Their relationship became something grotesque, something they both knew could never see the light of day. They lied. They hid. They made sure no one would ever suspect what was happening behind closed doors. Especially Lena. If she ever found out, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be war. So they were careful, so careful. But secrets that dark never stay buried. Soraya always wanted more control, more power, more freedom. For years, she had struggled to carve out a life for herself, scraping by on her own terms. But no matter how much she built, how much she gained, there was always something missing. Stability, security, wealth. And then one day, she realized the answer had been right in front of her all along. Jameson was a military veteran, a man who had dedicated years of his life to serving his country. And with that service came benefits. Government checks, medical care, a lifetime of financial security. She had heard him talk about it before, offhandedly mentioning the VA benefits he received each month. The pension, the disability compensation, the kind of money that wasn't life-changing on its own, but combined with his other assets, it was enough. Enough to live comfortably, enough to never have to struggle again, enough to make sure she was set for life. And she wanted it, all of it. The moment the thought entered her mind, it consumed her. But there was a problem. Jameson was still married. Lena was still in the picture. And as long as she was around, Soraya didn't have a legal claim to anything. Even if her father wanted to give it all to her, he couldn't. The law wouldn't allow it. She had done her research, looked into every loophole, every possibility, and the answer became clear. If she was his wife, she could take it all. Marriage was the key. It was twisted, disgusting, unthinkable, but it was also perfect. She had already crossed every moral line imaginable. What was one more? Jameson didn't hesitate. The moment she suggested it, he agreed. He had fallen too deep, too fast. And Soraya knew exactly how to manipulate him. She made him feel like it was them against the world. Like their love was some untouchable force, something greater than laws or rules. And so behind closed doors, in a courthouse where no one asked questions, they did the unthinkable. They got married. The ink on the marriage certificate hadn't even dried before Soraya realized her next problem. Her siblings, Camille, Braylon, they were obstacles. Even if Jameson was out of the picture, they could still challenge her claim. They could demand their share, fight her in court, drag her through a legal battle that could take years. And Soraya didn't have years. She had spent too long waiting for the life she deserved. She wouldn't let anything stand in her way. Not Camille, not Braylon, not even Jameson, because deep down, she always knew the truth. She didn't love him. She never did. This was never about him. It was about his money, his benefits, his life insurance. And once he had served his purpose, he had to go too. If she was going to do this, she had to do it right. A break-in, a violent home invasion, something random, something brutal, something that would make the cops believe that a group of masked men had stormed the house looking for cash and killed everyone inside when they didn't find what they were looking for. It was flawless, and when the time came, she wouldn't hesitate. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about winning. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that only existed in the dead of night when the world was deep in sleep, oblivious to the horrors lurking in the shadows. Soraya stood in the darkness, gun in hand, heart pounding, breath slow and steady. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. She had spent weeks planning, calculating, waiting, and now there was no turning back. She adjusted her gloves, tightening them around her fingers. No prints, no evidence, no mistakes. She had staged everything perfectly. The back door was pried open, the lock forcefully broken, an obvious sign of forced entry. It had to look real, like a robbery gone horribly wrong, like a desperate group of criminals had stormed the house, ransacking every corner for cash and valuables. And when they didn't find what they were looking for, they had resorted to violence. That was the story. A home invasion, a random, senseless act of brutality. But there was nothing random about this. Soraya moved carefully, gliding through the hallway like a phantom, the cold steel of the gun pressing against her palm. She knew exactly where to go, exactly where to begin. Her mother's room was first. Lena was asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic, blissfully unaware of the danger looming just beyond her door. Soraya pushed it open, stepping inside with slow, calculated movements. She raised the gun. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, no guilt. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the silence, a deafening explosion of violence. Lena jerked awake, eyes wide with confusion, mouth opening as if to scream. But there was no time. Another shot, then another. The bed was soaked in red, sheets tangled in lifeless limbs. It was over, 1 down, 3 to go. Soraya didn't stop to look. She turned, moving quickly, her pulse steady, her mind clear. She had expected to feel something. Regret, pain, a flicker of emotion. But there was nothing. She stepped into the hallway, heading toward the next room. Camille's. Her sister was younger, softer. She had always been the quiet one, the one who tried to keep the peace when the family fought. Soraya remembered how Camille used to look at her when they were kids, like she wanted to understand her, like she wanted to fix her. It was pathetic. Now Camille would understand nothing. Soraya crept into the room, the moonlight casting long shadows over the bed. Camille was curled up, wrapped in blankets, breathing evenly. A dreamless sleep. Soraya raised the gun. 1 shot. That's all it took. Camille didn't even stir. 2 down. Braylon's room was next. He was different, tougher, stronger. If anyone could fight back, it was him. Soraya knew she had to be fast, precise. She pushed the door open, slipping inside, aiming at the lump beneath the covers. But before she could fire, a sharp gasp, the sound of movement. Braylon sat up, eyes adjusting to the dark, his confusion twisting into horror as he saw the gun. Soraya? The bullet caught him in the chest before he could say another word. He fell back, choking, blood bubbling at his lips, hands clawing at the wound, as if he could somehow stop it. He couldn't. He never could. Soraya watched him struggle, eyes dulling, breath slowing. It was almost poetic. He had spent his whole life trying to be strong, but in the end, strength meant nothing. 3 down, only 1 left. The man she had married, the man she had used. Jameson was in the master bedroom exactly where she knew he would be. He had been fast asleep, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. A man so blind, so stupid that he had never seen the truth standing right in front of him. Soraya stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her weight. Jameson stirred, brow furrowing, lips parting in groggy confusion. Soraya? His voice was thick with sleep. She didn't answer. He blinked, sitting up slightly, his gaze falling to the gun in her hands. A flicker of understanding passed through his face, but it was too late. She pulled the trigger. The first shot hit his shoulder, knocking him back against the headboard. He groaned, hand clamping over the wound, eyes wide with betrayal. Soraya, what? Another shot, then another, and another. His body slumped. His breathing stopped. It was done. Her entire family, gone. She exhaled, rolling her shoulders, the tension bleeding from her muscles. There was still work to do. She moved quickly, methodically, trashing the house, flipping furniture, ripping open drawers, scattering valuables across the floor. She needed the scene to tell a story. A robbery, a senseless, violent crime committed by faceless intruders, something shocking, something tragic, something that had nothing to do with her. When it was finished, she took a step back, surveying her work. Perfect. She had won. With her entire family dead, there was no one left to challenge her claim, no one left to stop her from taking everything. The house was silent once more. But this time it wasn't the quiet of a peaceful home. It was the silence of death. The crime scene was brutal, too brutal for a simple robbery gone wrong. The bodies of her mother and siblings lay lifeless, executed with precision. Blood pooled beneath them, staining the floors. But something about it didn't sit right. The house was ransacked, but nothing valuable was missing. Expensive jewelry untouched, electronics still in place. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no broken locks. Whoever did this walked right in. Detectives combed through the wreckage, piecing together a story that didn't make sense. The sheer intimacy of the crime stood out. This wasn't random. This was personal. They searched for the next of kin. That's when they found Soraya, the estranged daughter. She didn't live in the house. She hadn't spoken to her mother and siblings in years, but she was still legally connected to her father. When detectives reached out, she played the role of a shocked, grieving daughter. "Who would do this?" she gasped. "Who could hurt my family like this?" The officers watched her carefully. No tears, no genuine sorrow, just shock. Or was it something else? They asked about her father. Had he been acting strangely? Did he mention feeling threatened? She faked confusion, pretending to be clueless. She had prepared for this. She knew what to say. But she wasn't prepared for the next question. "Where were you last night?" The room tensed. Soraya hesitated, but just for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. She had an airtight alibi. She wasn't anywhere near the house. She didn't live there. But why would they even ask that? Why would she be a suspect at all? Unless they knew something she didn't. The officers weren't accusing her, not yet. They were just asking routine questions. But she felt the pressure. They kept digging. They checked security cameras. They checked phone records. They checked financial transactions. And that's when they found it. A marriage certificate. Her name. Her father's name. A legally registered union. The detectives froze. The woman they were questioning wasn't just a grieving daughter. She was her father's wife. Silence filled the room. The air turned suffocating. The officers exchanged looks, their stomachs churning. This case had just twisted into something far worse than they imagined. Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't just murder. This was calculated. She wasn't a victim. She was the mastermind. They started retracing every step, every detail, every move she made leading up to the killings. Her bank activity showed large withdrawals. Her father's VA benefits had been modified. The marriage license was fresh, too fresh. The timing was too perfect. She thought she had committed the perfect crime, but the truth was unraveling faster than she could control it. Soraya sat across from the detectives, her face a careful mask of grief and confusion. She had rehearsed this moment, planned every reaction, every word, but the walls were closing in. They showed her the evidence, the staged crime scene, the untouched valuables, the lack of forced entry. "Why did the intruders only kill your family but leave everything else behind?" one detective pressed. She swallowed, forcing herself to look devastated. I don't know," she whispered. But they weren't buying it. They laid the marriage certificate on the table. Her name, her father's name, legally bound, a grotesque union. The room fell silent. She didn't flinch, but inside her pulse pounded. "You married your father," the lead investigator said slowly, as if speaking the words out loud would help him process the horror of it. Soraya shook her head. "It's not what you think." "Then tell us what it is," another detective challenged. She tried to spin a lie, tried to twist the truth into something believable. But the weight of the evidence was crushing her. Security footage placed her near the crime scene earlier that day. Her bank records showed she had already begun altering her father's VA benefits. Phone records exposed the secret conversations between her and her father, plans disguised as whispered confessions of love. "You didn't just want the money," the detective said. "You wanted all of it, and the only way to get that was to kill everyone else standing in your way." Soraya's breath shuddered. She could feel the room caving in. No way out. She clenched her fists. "I want a lawyer." But it was too late. Her arrest sent shockwaves across the country. News stations ran the story on a loop. Texas cop marries her father, kills entire family for VA benefits. People were horrified, not just by the crime, but by the sheer calculation behind it. She wasn't just a murderer, she was a monster. And when the verdict came down, it was swift and brutal. Life in prison, no parole. For the rest of her days she would rot behind bars, trapped in a cage of her own making. In the end, justice was served. This woman, who once wore a badge, now sits behind bars. No longer the enforcer of the law, but a chilling reminder of how greed can drive someone to commit the unthinkable. A woman who married her own father. A daughter who murdered her entire family. All for money. It's the kind of crime that leaves the world in shock, struggling to understand how something so twisted could ever happen. But what do you think? Was this all about greed, or was there something even darker at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This case has stunned people everywhere, and we want to hear what you have to say. If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Everyday True Crime, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the darkest crimes. And don't forget, leave a comment with your thoughts on this case. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.